Do you get a refund at this
I'm going to try,
Yeah, get your money back. Alice Blair will help you get your money back.
I was going to say, they all wait. Nice to see you both. First things first, the Prime Minister has said that he is living proof that Britain is not a racist country in reference to an ongoing row over Islamophobia. I mean, this thing's not going away, is it?
No, and that is such a daft answer, with all due respect, Prime Minister, because that would be like Margaret Thatcher saying, now that I'm Prime Minister of this country, there's no such thing as misogyny and sexism within Britain. And here we are, decades later, with a gender pay gap, right?
Yeah.
So I think this kind of exceptionalist, look at me, haven't I done well, and so therefore there is no such thing as anybody else facing racism, is nonsense. But I think what I want to talk about is the absolute masterclass that Nick gave this morning on LBC, which is when ministers come on and prevaricate and talk absolute rubbish. This is how you deal with them.
Tell us, Nick.
Tell us.
The minister in question is the illegal migration minister, Michael Tomlinson, and the Conservatives have got themselves in a huge row about comments that were made not just by Lee Anderson, which I know you've spoken about already. There's another former minister, senior, called Paul Scully, who said there are no-go zones in parts of London and in parts of Birmingham.
Which is beyond...
so dangerous to speak in that manner.
Yeah.
So dangerous.
So as Sayeeda says, rightly says, they're in a bad way. This minister comes around, he talks about various initiatives, and then I ask, why have you suspended Lee Anderson? Why has he lose the whip? Because what he said was wrong. He said what was said was wrong was 5 times, and then, is it Islamophobic? And he just said it's wrong, and it's wrong, and he refused. And Sayeeda very kindly retweeted it, and now it's got so much strength behind it because, of course, you are looking at a former chair of the party.
Yes, exactly. Do you get embarrassed by what goes on?
You know, of course I'm embarrassed and I worry about the party, but I also worry about the country. Because when you're in a position of leadership, part of your job is to find ways in which you bring people together, whatever your personal views or prejudices might be. And of course, we all have our personal views on all sorts of things, but you have a responsibility. You have the privilege of platform.
Indeed.
And at a time when people are worried about the cost of living crisis, you know, doctors' appointments, concerns about schooling for their kids, they do not need a government that is setting up community against community, teaching us all how to hate, you know, pushing out these culture wars. I mean, only this morning we've seen an arrest by, I think it was mainly in the northeast, but people from Derbyshire and Leeds for an extreme right-wing potential terrorist incident, and this is now before the courts in the next couple of days. And what I keep saying is, language has consequences. Toxic language at the top, culture wars at the top, have consequences, real-life consequences for people's lives.
Do the Conservatives have a chance of winning the next general election?
That's a really tough question, isn't it? You know, I mean, if they feel that the way to win the next election is to keep putting out red meat to the red seats, as they keep saying, that's nonsense. You know, I was born and raised in Yorkshire. I still live in Yorkshire. You know, the north of this country, the north of England, they're amazing places. And for us to somehow think that the only way we're going to win in these seats is to somehow put out rabid racist comments because that's what the north want to hear, that's insulting. The north want to hear about our plan for the economy, how we're going to make things better for them, how we're going to get a better transport network, how jobs are going to be better up there, how they're going to be better paid, how we're going to have good schools, how we're going to have decent hospitals. We don't want you to put out rubbish racist comments because that's not what's going to win you an election. And if the reason we lose the next election is because we were too rabid and too racist and too culture warish, then I'm sorry, that's probably better for Britain.
I've listened to a lot of Nick Ferrari on the radio. Is that a yes or a no?
He's been
you know, the interesting thing is, Andy,
well.
I will not be voting for the Conservatives at the next general election because as a member of the House of Lords, I do not have a vote, so I do not need to make that
See?
That's
right.
What do I do at that point, Nick? What do I do at that point?
It's been lovely having you. It's 10:50 and on we go.
Can I ask a question to you, Sayeeda? Do you think that Rishi should have called out the comments as what they are?
Yeah.
Right? It just seems really like avoidance, and it doesn't, you know, like, call a spade a spade. Like, this is what it is, and while it might not be affecting you...
Yes.
It is Islamophobia.
It is. And you know, we were talking earlier before we came on set that the Labour Party went through a point when it just couldn't use the word anti-Semitism, right? It was prevaricating and they were finding it really difficult to say, well, what does it really mean? And what are we talking about? And what's the word? And how do we interpret it? And in the end, kicking and screaming, the Labour Party had to deal with the fact that they had issues with anti-Semitism. And we are literally following that step by step. Oh, we won't call it Islamophobia. We don't know what to call it. We won't actually say it. We won't use the word. Well, we don't know how it's defined. I mean, it's just nonsense. And if we're having to deal with racism is racism, right?
Yeah.
Just say it. Just say it.
Do you think
racism.
it's Islamophobia?
It's absolutely Islamophobia. You know, when you start putting out tropes that somehow Sadiq Khan is some sort of an extremist and him and his extremist mates have now got control of London. I mean, can you imagine saying that about other communities? Can you imagine if we'd said that about, well, that lot over there are extremists and they've all got control of this city? It's just stereotypical tropes, it's stigmatising, and it's going to stop.
I
mean, it's got real-life consequences.
It's not going away, is it?
No.
And it feels that it's all becoming so divisive.
Terribly divisive.
Yeah, and that's what scares me the most.
People like Sayeeda, you're pretty brave to go into politics, prepared to do it. You know it's going to be a bit of biff and bat. But we've just come through a weekend where one Labour MP was shouted at and heckled at a constituency meeting. A Conservative MP had he and his daughter shouted at in a curry house. It is now the job of senior politicians to take the sting out of the air, to take the toxicity. There are many reasons you can attack Sadiq Khan. I happen to live and work in London and have done most of my working life. I don't think he's been a great success for this town. The idea that he's in some clutch of Islamists is offensive and wrong. There are many areas you can go for him politically. That was personal. He's had an opportunity to apologise, Mr Anderson, and he's chosen not to. That, for me, doubles the crime.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, and it just, for me, breeds hatred.
Yeah.
It's just all breeding.
Well, it's not political at all.
No, exactly.
There's knock-on effects that those words have that actually are on the ground and are on our streets.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's sort of... It feels really irresponsible to me.
Well, we saw
really
that repeated, and for me, the most tragic example of it was in, you know, the kind of neighbouring constituency for me in West Yorkshire, where we lost Jo Cox, right? We lost her because we had this terrible debate about refugees, about Brexit, about, you know, and it was ratcheted. And then when she was attacked and she was killed by a terrorist, those were the words and the language that was being used.
And then you lost David.
And then we lost David.
We're going to talk a little bit more about how the
consequences.
changing times are for MPs a little bit after the break. We'll also be revealing the